They told me I ate but didn't help. The words didn't come in a moment of anger. They came in the middle of dinner, from the woman my son had chosen to marry. Samantha looked right at me with a tight smile and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. She eats like a queen but doesn't lift a finger. I paused, my fork in midair, and looked across the table. Jason, my only son, my baby I had raised with blistered hands and a worn-out back, didn't even look up. He just kept eating. That silence broke something in me. My grandson just ate, stopped chewing. He didn't understand everything, but he felt it. The air had shifted. It had turned cold. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't explain how arthritis made it hard to grip the mop, or how my back pain made standing feel like lifting weights. I didn't remind them that I still folded laundry when I could, picked up toys left all over the floor, or that I had once been the woman who held this entire family together. Instead, I calmly finished my meal, gathered the plates, and washed the dishes without a word. That was my response, not because I was weak, but because I had swallowed worse in life and kept going. Later that night, I lay in what they called the guest room, though it felt more like a storage closet with a bed shoved in. The fan on the ceiling clicked with every turn, and the window was too high for me to see anything but sky. I heard them laughing in the living room, Jason and Samantha, probably watching a show, sipping drinks, living easily. My grandson was already asleep. I stayed awake, not crying, just still. A cold kind of resignation settled into my chest. I realized that tonight's insult wasn't sudden. It had been coming for years. I had been slowly erased, bit by bit, and now I was nothing more than a burden in the house I once fought to keep. I remembered how I had spent years caring for my dying husband, washing him, feeding him, making sure he kept his dignity to the end. I remembered holding Jason's tiny hand, walking him to school in worn shoes, working double shifts to afford his books. I remembered sewing his buttons, cheering from the back row at his graduation because we couldn't afford extra tickets. And now, I was the one being asked to earn my meals. But I didn't leave the next morning. That would have been too easy. I made coffee, folded the towels, repaired the button on my grandson's jacket without being asked. I did what I had always done, quietly. 2 days later they left for a weekend trip, just the three of them. Samantha said they needed space. A couple's weekend, she called it. Jason still wouldn't meet my eyes. That was when I knew I had to leave. Not in a rush, not in shame, but with purpose. Packed one suitcase. Just my clothes, my rosary, my ID, and an old leather-bound notebook my husband had once gifted me. I didn't leave a note. I just placed the house key on the kitchen table, next to a folded dish towel I had washed that morning. I took the city bus. No taxi, no one to help. My knees ached with every step, but I walked into a modest care home on the other side of town. It smelled like boiled peas and disinfectant, but it was clean. It was quiet, and no one looked at me like I was in the way. The woman at the front desk gave me a form to fill out. She didn't ask why I was there. Maybe she already knew. I smiled and said, "Just need a little peace and quiet. Only for a while." Inside I felt hollow. That night, I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the shadow of a tree outside my window, and one thought refused to leave me. Had I truly become just someone who ate? Just a burden? But somewhere, buried deep in my heart, another voice stirred. A voice I hadn't heard in years. And it whispered, "What if they're wrong?" The next morning I made my tea the way I liked it. Strong, with just a touch of honey. I wrapped myself in the old blanket I had crocheted 2 winters ago and sat by the window. That quiet voice inside me was no longer just whispering. It was rising, steady and clear. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers and called James, my late husband's oldest friend and the man who had once handled our will. We hadn't spoken in years. "James," I said softly, "do you remember the house deed?" There was a pause, then a deep, familiar voice. "Yes. I remember everything about that day." 3 days later, I was sitting across from him in his old office, surrounded by the same dusty books, the smell of leather and paper bringing memories back like a tide. He pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the desk. "You should have received a copy," he said. I opened it with both hands and held my breath. There was my name, the address, the date. The house they asked me to leave had been mine, legally and fully, since 1994. My husband had signed it over before he died. I had fought to save that house when we almost lost it during his illness. And he had made sure it would always be mine. I never told anyone, I whispered. James gave a quiet smile. Maybe now is the time. I didn't know what I was going to do with that information yet. But I knew this. I wasn't just someone who ate. I had been the one who built that home, kept it warm, kept it together. They hadn't invited me in. I had let them stay. 3 days after I left their house, I returned to James's office. My hands no longer shook. I told him, I want to sell it. He didn't ask why. He simply opened the file again and started the paperwork. Quietly, I added, I want them to find out from a letter, not from me. He nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was choosing myself, maybe for the first time in my life. When I left his office, I walked past the bus stop with a folder clutched to my chest like armor. The air smelled of rain and diesel, and still, for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just balance. For years I had lived in that house. But the truth was, they had been living in mine. That night, I brought a paper bag of pastries for the kitchen staff at the care home. I also brought a small bouquet of flowers for Helen, the woman in the room down the hall who once told me, through tears, that her daughter-in-law made her eat alone in the laundry room. Helen and I shared tea that night in silence, and when she left, I spread the documents across my bed. Every line felt like a breath I hadn't taken in years. My husband hadn't just loved me. He had protected me. I traced his signature with my finger and whispered to myself, I'm not just someone who eats. I am the woman who holds the deed. And now, I knew exactly what to do with it. It took several weeks to finalize the sale. James handled everything with quiet precision. No alerts, no calls to Jason or Samantha. Just the slow, deliberate closing of a door they didn't even know they were walking through. In the meantime, I stayed at the care home, doing what I had always done. Helping where I could, listening to others, offering a hand when needed. Not because I was expected to, but because I chose to. I folded laundry in the common room, sorted mail for a neighbor whose eyesight had dimmed, and led a knitting group every Sunday, even though my own fingers weren't as quick anymore. That's how I met Helen. She was sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, with a walker covered in pink ribbons and a laugh that always came out like a bark. She'd been through her own kind of hell, survived cancer, raised 2 boys, then cast out by family after her husband died. They said I'd become a shadow, she told me one night. Like I disappeared the moment I stopped being useful. I didn't have to respond. My silence said everything. Then one rainy afternoon James called. It's done, he said. Funds have cleared. The house is no longer yours. I thanked him, hung up and waited. The letters must have arrived by the end of the week. One from the bank, one from the real estate office, and one final notice to vacate within 30 days. On Sunday evening my phone rang. Jason's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. He called again the next day. Then again. Finally I sent a message. The transfer was legal. The home was mine. I simply took back the meal I once paid for. There was silence after that, until Samantha called. Her voice was high, panicked, furious. You evil old woman. You sold our house. This was our home. I didn't flinch. I answered calmly. No, it was my home. You just lived there. Rent-free. Like I once fed you both. Now it's someone else's turn. She hung up. That night, I stood at the window of the care home and watched the lights shimmer across the courtyard. I could hear Helen humming in the distance. A tune from some old church hymn. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt still. The next morning Jason called again. This time his voice was different. Quieter, broken. Mom, we're going to lose everything, he whispered. Samantha left. I'm sleeping on a friend's couch. I work nights now. I just messed up. I should have stopped her. I should have said something. He listened. Then, when he was done, I said the words I had held in my heart for months. I'm not taking anything from you, Jason. I'm only reclaiming what you thought I had forgotten. I don't want your money. I don't even want your apology. I just want my silence back. And this is how I earn it. He said nothing after that. The line went dead. And that was fine. Because for once, I had spoken not to please, not to protect, but to be heard. I made tea that night, the kind I used to serve with Sunday pancakes, and I sipped it alone. Only this time, the sweetness belonged to me. I didn't rush to spend the money. It sat untouched for weeks, not because I didn't know what to do with it, but because I wanted to be certain that whatever came next had meaning. I didn't want a cruise. I didn't want luxury. I didn't want revenge. I wanted purpose. One morning I took the bus to the east side of town. There was an old house. 4 units, sagging porch, chipped paint, but it had good bones. It was quiet, forgotten, like the women I had met in the care home. The agent looked at me like I was lost. Most folks your age look for retirement communities, she said. Smiled. I'm not looking for comfort. I'm looking for use. I bought it that day. I named it Haven House. Beneath the hand-carved sign I placed a plaque that read, "No one here proves their worth to stay." I didn't want it to be just a shelter. I wanted it to be a home, a statement, a place where women like me, like Helen, could find safety without shame. Took time. I hired a handyman named Tommy who worked weekends for free once he heard what the house was for. "You're building something good," he said. "That feels rare these days." We painted the walls ourselves. Planted herbs in old tubs turned into garden beds. Furnished the rooms with soft chairs, second-hand blankets, good lighting, and a kettle that was always hot. Helen was the first to move in. She cried when she stepped through the door. "You didn't forget me," she whispered. "Of course not," I said. "We remember the forgotten here." Soon 3 more joined us. Miss Beatrice, once a schoolteacher, who still corrected our grammar with a wink. Marion, a former florist, who now nurtured Basil like it was a newborn. And then Roland, the first man we welcomed in, a widower who cooked better than any of us and never ran out of jokes. I became the unofficial manager. I did groceries, helped with doctor appointments, and organized legal paperwork. On Thursdays, I read the newspaper aloud. On Sundays, we played old records and danced in socks across the wood floor. It wasn't a care home. It was a life restarted. One afternoon, as I sat with a teacup in hand and the sunlight warming my lap, Roland looked up from slicing tomatoes and said, "You know, we're all alive today because someone once called you a leech." I laughed. Deep, stunned, and full. The irony of it. "You turned pain into shelter," he said. "That's more than most ever manage." That night I wrote a new entry in my notebook. Asterisk, they called me a burden. But with the money from that burden, I am feeding 4 souls who now sleep in peace. Asterisk. There were no locks on the inside doors at Haven House. Not because we didn't value privacy, but because we had nothing to hide. We trusted one another in ways our own families had failed to. We were a small tribe of survivors. One evening, as the sun painted gold across the porch, I stood next to Helen. We sipped chamomile tea, watching the shadows stretch across the garden. "It'll all be happy again," she said softly. "You're not alone," I told her. She smiled. "Neither are you." And for the first time in a long, long time I believed it. He came to see me almost a year after the house was sold. I recognized him the moment he stepped through the gate. His shoulders hunched. His eyes dimmer, not from age but from weight. He looked like someone who had run out of excuses. He didn't come with arrogance, or with loud apologies. Just silence. The kind that carries regret. Jason stood there, awkward, older than I remembered, and said in a voice that barely reached me, "I know I don't deserve to be here." I didn't answer. I just motioned toward the empty chair beside me on the porch. He sat slowly. "We lost the house," he said. "Samantha's gone." She said I should have stood up to her. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do back then. "Mom." His voice cracked. We have nothing now. I sleep on a friend's couch. I work nights. And I came to say I'm sorry. I still didn't speak. Instead, I reached down and opened the small wooden box I kept beside my chair. Inside was a photograph, faded but clear, taken during the early days of Haven House. The porch was still unpainted, the garden barely planted, but in the center were 4 people holding paintbrushes and laughing like they hadn't in years. I handed it to him. He looked down, confused at first, and then his breath caught. "You built this," he whispered. "With the money from our house?" He nodded. "You didn't spend it on yourself?" I shook my head. "I spent it on something that could grow." He stared at the photo, then at me. "Why now?" he asked. Finally spoke. "Because I ate your rice for 1 year. But you ate mine for 30. I'm only collecting a little interest." His mouth opened like he wanted to respond, but no words came out. I stood up. My legs hurt more these days, but I stood tall. "I didn't do this to hurt you," he said quickly. "I just wanted to thank you. For everything I never said thank you for." I studied his face, the stubble on his chin, the lines that worry had carved. "There's something you still don't understand," I said. "I never needed repayment. I needed respect. I needed to know my years weren't erased just because I slowed down. That the hands that once held your fevered head weren't suddenly useless because they trembled." He lowered his eyes. "I forgot who you were," he whispered. "No," I replied. "You remembered too late." There was a pause. Then he asked, "Can I help? With the house? With the others?" I shook my head gently. "This place doesn't need your guilt. Needs your growth. Live better. Love better. That's how you honor what I gave." As he stood to leave, I reached back into the box and handed him one final thing. Not a letter, not a lecture. A blank sheet of deed paper. "It's yours," I said. "Go fill this with something worthy." He held it like it was gold. "I will," he said. And for the first time in years I believed him. That spring afternoon moved slowly, as if the day itself had nowhere urgent to be. The breeze carried the scent of wild lilacs and coming rain. I sat on the porch, holding a chipped teacup that curved perfectly into my palm. It had been mine for years, and it remembered me. Just like this house did. Just like I had finally remembered myself. Someone inside began humming an old hymn, off-key but full of spirit. Helen's voice called out from the pergola, arguing with Roland over how to cook green beans. Laughter followed, light, real, effortless. These weren't people waiting to die. These were stories still unfolding. And Haven House wasn't just a building. It was proof. Proof that I had never been just someone who ate. I had been the one who fed, who gave, who endured. And now I was the one who rebuilt.